Welcome back to the Mentor Roulette grind. This time, the Wheel of Jobs decided that we play Scholar on a Monday evening, and thanks to a milder set, we also managed to get a lot done in this set. For duty 1, we went to Haukke Manor, and our tank immediately admits this is their first time here, so I start off by warning them the duty is unusually non-linear relative to previous dungeons. As a result, they sorta let me lead the way in where we go, but they do try to stay proactive as well, which is great. On the first boss, I did consider offering to teach them about interrupting, but I feel like this duty also just was a good opportunity for them to practice their tanking in general, so I instead said nothing. Overall, they did well after all. When we get to the cellar section of the dungeon, I notice a tank having trouble with navigating, of course, because they don't know which of the side paths we need to take. I let them know that I will mark it when we have to take a side path, and with that in order, they seem to more confidently push forward. On a different note, it's quite insane how much burst damage this Reaper Summoner combo seems to deliver sometimes. Some of these Succubi just get instantly decimated, and we don't even have a warrior. On the second boss fight, a general tip is that stunning or interrupting the Ice Spike spell on the Imp is a good idea, as the Ice Spikes themselves have a chance of applying an attack speed slow when struck. Aside from these things, the duty went nice and smooth. For duty 2, we went to the new Sunken Temple of Qarn. After all, it was changed in 7.2. A quite peculiar detail in this run was that it seemed like the tank knew exactly what to do and where to go, except I don't think I saw them use sprint at all. Strange. Remember, while it may be a bit scary to sprint ahead of the party as a tank, especially ahead of the healer, sprinting ahead also means the enemies get less opportunities to hit you, which in the worst case scenario, where you'd have to turn back, would allow you to be healthy enough to run back through the mobs to get to your healer if you really need it. Now, in regards to the dungeon changes, the first boss is still stunnable, which means, very interestingly, with all of its actions having more of a wind-up now, you can stun any action you find particularly awkward to deal with, whether it is the Mortal Ray Doom debuff or AoEs. Before the changes, you effectively had to guess and simply press the stun in advance before Mortal Ray starts casting to catch it. The second obvious change is that the heads that need to die on platforms now are simply turrets attached to their platforms. I'll say the old version was more of a quote-unquote puzzle, but ultimately it was mostly just annoying when the head would randomly shuffle out of the platform just before it died, so I'm sort of indifferent to this change. The final boss, on the other hand, felt a lot more like a downgrade. The Verges taking like one hit to die really made it feel like they really wanted to be sure you don't ignore them, which, fair, but still, a bit more HP on them would probably be reasonable. For duty 3, we went to Snowcloak, and our tank was a returning player. In particular, they mentioned at the end of the dungeon it was their first time tanking in a long time. As a result though, at the very start, we had a very hectic pull because our tank didn't realize their tank stance wasn't on. But we did manage to figure it out eventually. Unfortunately, we got their attention just as I went down. Who knows, maybe it was me dying that caught their attention in the first place. Another thing throughout the duty was that our tank seemed to use Homgang quite liberally. Unfortunately, they used it like a damage reduction cooldown, making it somewhat useless. I did mention this to them at the end too. Overall, the duty went fine, of course. Also, for anyone thinking I've lost my marbles with spamming Art of War so much, Art of War is a gain on 1 at level 50. Ruin 1 is 150 potency, Art of War is 150 potency, Ruin 2 is 140 potency, and instant casts means you get slightly more auto attacks. For duty 4, we went to Haukke Manor again, and this tank seemed to know exactly where to go, so my job mostly boiled down to being ahead and opening the doors as fights wrapped up. There was one particularly big pull where I was quite happy I got a lucky Adloquium crit, as that would have been a lot harder to heal without it. For duty 5, we went to Strayborough Deadwalk. This run went just fine, but I made the mistake of being more focused on using Dissipation often than doing as much damage as I can. The thing is, unless you need the ether flow to survive in the moment, or you're going to cast some healing spells, Dissipation is effectively trading about 10 Embrace casts for 3 Aetherflow. Taking into consideration pet potencies, this is at least 1500 potency worth of single target healing traded for 3 Aetherflows, which means that those Aetherflows really have to count to make up the difference. And if it is just for attacking, remember that 3 Aetherflow is just 300 potency worth of damage, and 1 Broil is 310. Which is to say, piece of advice, while using Dissipation on cooldown maximizes Aetherflow resource generation, it does come with a detriment, so sometimes there's no need to use it on cooldown. For duty 6, we went to Holminster Switch, and it turns out Elena knew me. Hello. In particular, they asked about a Black Mage guide, but I actually released that guide a couple hours before this duty. That said, this duty got very hectic as it seems the Paladin was not playing even close to optimally. Their gear indicated they were at least level 90. Their language settings suggested we would have trouble communicating. But to highlight the specifics, on the first big pull they had already used every single big defensive, so on the second big pull it was down to my Adlo spam. As we went through the dungeon, I also noticed that while they were using options like Requiescate, Fight or Flight and Goring Blade, they were not using Holy Spirit or Circle. At all. And Requiescate was typically used before Fight or Flight. There were also some random points where they suddenly decided to use Clemency out of nowhere. It made for a very challenging Holminster Switch run, but as the healer, I had a lot of control over managing that at least. Despite everything, we also had 0 wipes. For duty 7, we went to Vanguard, and the Viper was almost certainly a first-timer, as they watched cutscenes and made mistakes that would suggest first-timer. Our tank was using defensive cooldowns, but there were some problems here and there compounding to make it quite challenging. The first minor problem was their gear being level 90 Poetics gear, which is more comparable to level 93 gear, so that made things a bit more challenging than, someone synced down. That is of course a totally normal thing to run into though, so I'm not complaining about that. The second problem was that they used their defensive cooldowns probably in the most unpredictable and unreliable way possible. The worst among them being that they rather consistently used Bloodwetting just about 1 GCD later than they should, almost every single time. This meant that very often, when they did use Bloodwetting, they felt compelled to stack it with other cooldowns just to survive until the healing came, and often I also had to save them with a Lustrate to keep them up for that. My general advice for warriors in this regard is twofold. The first one is, while yes, holding Bloodwettings get more value is nice, just remember, it's only the first heal that becomes more valuable from this, as the remaining 3 hits just maintain your HP at full. I recommend you use Bloodwetting when you drop below half HP, if not sooner depending on how much damage you're taking. Going much further than that gets risky and doesn't help that much more. The second part is that once Bloodwetting is up and running on AoE, you will not need other defensives, so optimally, don't overlap Bloodwetting with another defensive on AoE. Use the other defensives to cover between Bloodwettings. Anyway, we somehow managed to get through with 0 wipes. For duty 8, we went to Sephirot, normal. And I have to say, it feels so strange to do this fight on just normal after doing it on extreme so much. Mechanics feel backwards in the weirdest way. To give a specific example, Phase 2 starts with a triple knockback and then straight to Storm of Words, and it takes most of the fight before the half-room cleaves happen at all. It's as if Extreme starts like 2 minutes earlier in the sequence, and normal gets these mechanics from the quote-unquote second round. Of course, things like half the raid becoming resistant to magic or physical and weak to the other is also entirely missing. Also, because the Storm of Words comes so early, it is not surprising the sudden knockbacks just in general sneaks up on players so much. For duty 9, we went to Ultima Weapon Extreme, and turns out Gaius, yes really, knew me. Hello. On the first try, Charlotta dies to Clive simply not understanding that a tank switch is a thing that needs to be done. Several of us are actively trying to tell them to provoke, but nothing. Later in the fight, we wipe to the final aetheric boom as 2 pairs explode. On the second try, Charlotta tries genuinely everything to try and get Clive to tank first, which makes the pull rather awkward. An interesting detail is that the fight runs on a combination of HP thresholds and timed mechanics, so in a way, holding back a bit can sometimes lead to the mechanics coming out in a more relaxed way, making things easier. That said, this time, when Charlotta hits 3 stacks of the tank debuff, that is when I start shouting for Clive to provoke, naming them specifically, sound effect announcements. Eventually, they start spamming ranged attacks, but it takes a shirk from Charlotta before Clive finally provokes. And it takes so long Charlotta hits the 4th stack. Meanwhile, the Aetheric Boom 3 is resolved correctly, leading to a successful duty of course, and also all done in under 10 minutes. For duty 10, we went to Lost City of Amdapor hard, and turns out Fire Rabbit knew me. Hello! Our tank immediately stated it was their first time tanking this duty. Additionally, their gear was a bit on the weaker side, but we managed. A tip for the first boss here is that Nero Squama puts down ghosts of all party members, and these ghosts fire out cone AoEs in the way they're facing, which means if you face out of the arena, you can pretty much neutralize your ghost. Another tip is that the gas clouds do surprisingly little damage, so as a ranged, or better yet as the healer, just intercepting them may actually be best for clearing quickly, as it means the targeted player won't have to move away. On the final boss, we also had a perfect storm of everyone respecting the Cure forecasts and standing in it, minimizing the healing the boss received from it. For duty 11, we went to Titan Normal, and these early trials always have so long cutscenes. And also, our tank managed to demonstrate that you can somehow survive standing out in the red the first time, since apparently there's a little ledge there. Also, the fact Titan only stomps once for the raid wides came as a huge surprise to me somehow. For duty 12, we went as a 13 minutes replacement in Tender Valley, and it appears both of the DPS are first timers. As we fight through the final boss, we almost have a disaster as both the tank and the DPS almost dies to not making it to the correct platform in the labyrinth, and our second DPS definitely didn't make it. For the multi-stacks, one of our DPS also moves out too slow, leading to them getting a heavy dot, immediately followed by the other DPS getting spiked by the knockback. Somehow, Great Torrent doesn't hit anyone, and we managed to wrap it up. Despite the small mistakes here and there, I still didn't even feel compelled to use Seraphism. Nice to have such a big panic button, I guess. For duty 13, we went to Slugs and Sylphs and Sylphs and Slugs. And this guild test felt like the weirdest demonstration in refusing to do the duty mechanics correctly I've ever been a part of. The tank only used 1-2-3s, and by the time we got to the boss, it seemed like they refused to interact with anything beyond 1-2-3s as well. It reached a point where they even got petrified. The saddest part is that completely ignoring everything still worked just fine. For duty 14, we went as a 7-minute replacement in Chrysalis, and turns out Legio knew me. Hello. I'm guessing they had a terrible healer before me, because just as I entered, I was asked if I was capable. We also had an archer in the group, which is not a good sign. Over the course of the duty, it felt like several times I had to heal way more than necessary simply because people were all the way off into Narnia unnecessarily. That said, for this duty, I have 3 tips to talk about. The first one is dealing with the orbs intermission. There are 3 different types of orbs. The red and greenish orbs give opposing debuffs that replace each other. This means if you take 2 of the same color in quick succession, you take a lot more damage and get knocked away. If you instead alternate them, you take very little damage. Optimally, you do this, but sometimes you may have to take 2 in a row. The third type, a darker orb, summons an ad that a moment later will shoot a cone AoE out in the arena, so killing it is a good idea. Simply fan out and try to intercept as many orbs as you can, alternating colors. The second tip is when the portal into the other space opens, Nabrialis puts a surprisingly potent dot on everyone. If you simply run away from the portal as long as it lets you, it will time out the dot just before the portal forces you in. Nothing is happening in the other area in this time frame anyway, so it is safe to do this. Remember that when you enter, most buffs and debuffs you had before entering get their durations massively amplified, so setting up any damage buffs you may have or any defensive cooldowns is a great idea, as they will almost certainly last the whole phase. Notably, tanks, maybe not Dark Knights, should use their invulns such that they're impervious to damage for the whole phase. While in the other space, tanks should be intercepting the meteors dropping, which may require defensives, hence why you set those up beforehand. The first meteor that lands will produce a tear, which everyone should be attacking. Tanks mainly with a ranged attack if in range. Optimally, a limit break, preferably a melee one, is used to finish it quickly. But if your team is decent and is bringing it on the damage, and the tanks are intercepting meteors, you don't need a limit break for this. However, if, for instance, one of your DPS is an archer, it might be a problem. A last little bonus tip for healers is that when the boss uses triple, his next tank buster hits 3 times, so you may want to be ready to help with some healing. Unless the tank is well geared and using defensives, that tank buster can kill with no healer intervention. Finally, for duty 15, we went to Zap Brannigan's War Tactics, the guild test. Right at the start, our tank didn't realize their stance was off. After that, we went to it. And well, we had to fight through wave after wave to get to the boss, as we just barely failed to kill him before conjurers managed to get heals through, which then led to more conjurers arriving healing more. It wasn't a problem, but let's just say we did reach a point where ignoring the ads seemed like it would lead to a stalemate. Weird. A rather condensed set of duties this time around. What makes it a bit awkward when I manage to do a lot of duties like this is I feel compelled to get a bit more to the point with each duty, which also means there's less space to bring up small things without the video becoming extremely long. But if I just do 10 duties and not much happens, that isn't great either. That said, we did manage to help a bunch of tanks get some proper practice this time, huh? Now, that is all for this video. Thank you so much for watching. If you would like to support me and my channel more directly, you can become a member like these wonderful people here. You can also alternatively support me through Ko-Fi, link in the description. You can also support the channel by letting the YouTube algorithm know by liking the video, leaving a comment, subscribing, sharing, and hitting the bell to get notified when next I post a video. Fun fact, before Shadowbringers, Scholars, Fairies, Eos and Celine had different toolkits. Eos had Whispering Dawn and 2 cooldowns that effectively combined into Fey Illumination. Celine instead had a party-wide Ishuna, an Interrupt, and a single target haste cooldown, meaning reducing the GZD. It was like about 3%, not anything major. The particularly standout options here are definitely a healer with an Interrupt and an AoE Ishuna. But would you trade Whispering Dawn and Fey Illumination for that? I am curious.